You work as hard as anyone, but success seems to elude you, while others advance rapidly around you. You follow all the conventional career advice, but aren't seeing the results you expected. And you're starting to wonder if there's a secret formula that successful people know but won't share. I am Niccolò Machiavelli, and I spent my life studying power, politics, and what truly drives human success in the most ruthless arena of all Renaissance Italy. The success patterns I discovered will finally give you the breakthrough you've been seeking, revealing the exact principles that separate those who achieve from those who merely try. What worked for princes and political leaders 5 centuries ago works for today's most successful entrepreneurs and leaders. The same strategies that built empires can build careers and transform lives. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready for transformation. I was born into a world where power shifted like sand in an hourglass. Florence in my youth was a city of magnificent contradictions. Breathtaking art flourished alongside brutal politics, where a merchant could become a prince overnight, and a prince could lose his head by morning. The Florentine Republic seal that hung in my father's study bore the lily of our city, but I learned early that flowers could hide thorns. My family served the Republic faithfully, believing that virtue and dedication would be rewarded. I watched my father labor in obscurity, honest to a fault, while men of lesser character rose to positions of influence through cunning and strategic alliances. This was my first lesson in the harsh mathematics of success. Good intentions multiplied by hard work often equals nothing if you lack the formula for advancement. The Medici family dominated our city like a great shadow. When they were in power, their supporters prospered. When they were exiled, their enemies took revenge. I witnessed this cycle, repeatedly watching families rise and fall based not on their merit, but on their ability to read the political winds and position themselves accordingly. The seal of Florence remained constant, but the hands that controlled it changed with each shift in power. During the Pazzi conspiracy, when rivals attempted to assassinate Lorenzo de' Medici during Easter Mass, I saw something that would haunt me forever. The conspirators believed that killing Lorenzo would automatically transfer power to them. They were wrong. They had eliminated a person, but not the system that supported him. Within hours, the people of Florence hunted down the conspirators and displayed their bodies as warnings. I realized then that power is not a position. It is a relationship between those who command and those who obey. My teenage years coincided with the rise of Girolamo Savonarola, the Dominican friar who convinced Florence to abandon its pursuit of wealth and beauty in favor of religious purity. I watched in fascination as this man, who owned nothing but his robes, brought the mighty Medici to their knees through the sheer force of his words and the people's desire for meaning. But I also saw his downfall when his prophecies failed and the people turned against him. The very crowds that had burned their vanities in his bonfires eventually burned Savonarola himself. These experiences carved themselves into my soul like words etched in marble. I understood that success in this world required more than good intentions or even good actions. It demanded an unflinching understanding of human nature, the recognition that people are driven by fear, desire, and self-interest, no matter how noble they appear on the surface. The Florentine Republic's seal may have proclaimed our virtues, but the reality of our politics revealed our true nature. When I discovered Caesar's commentaries in my early 20s, I felt like I had found a map to a treasure that everyone else was searching for blindly. Here was a man who wrote about power not as poets and philosophers imagined it should be, but as it actually functioned in the real world. Caesar didn't waste time lamenting the moral failings of his enemies. He studied their weaknesses and exploited them with surgical precision. I devoured every classical text I could find, but I read them differently than my contemporaries. While others admired Cicero's eloquent speeches about virtue, I noticed how his moral posturing ultimately led to his assassination. While they praised Cato's unwavering principles, I observed how his inflexibility made him irrelevant in the very republic he claimed to serve. The ancients taught me that there are two types of people in this world: those who adapt their methods to reality, and those who insist reality should adapt to their methods. My education in the streets of Florence proved more valuable than anything I learned in books. I watched merchants negotiate deals, observing how they mixed truth with strategic omissions to achieve favorable terms. I studied how successful artisans managed their workshops, noticing that the masters who prospered were those who understood not just their craft, but the psychology of their customers and competitors. They didn't just create beautiful things, they created desire for their creations. The classical texts became my laboratory for understanding human behavior. Livy's histories revealed patterns that repeated across centuries, how leaders rose by promising what people wanted to hear, how they maintained power by delivering what people actually needed, and how they fell when they confused these two very different things. Plutarch's biographies showed me that great men were not born different from others. They simply understood and applied principles that their contemporaries ignored. I began to see the fatal flaw in traditional education. Schools taught students what they should do in an ideal world, but the world we actually inhabit is far from ideal. They trained young minds to expect justice, fairness, and rational behavior from others, setting them up for disappointment and failure. I decided to train myself differently, to expect from others exactly what their nature and circumstances would logically produce. This approach initially disturbed my friends and family. They accused me of cynicism, of losing faith in human goodness. But I wasn't becoming cynical, I was becoming realistic. I still believed in goodness, but I recognized that goodness without power is often impotent, while power without goodness is at least effective. Caesar's commentaries taught me that if you want to do good in this world, you must first understand how to succeed in it. The transformation was profound. Instead of being frustrated when people acted according to their self-interest, I learned to predict and work with these tendencies. Instead of expecting others to share my vision immediately, I developed skills to align their interests with my goals. The classics hadn't made me more ruthless, they had made me more effective. My first encounter with Cesare Borgia's signet ring came during a diplomatic mission when I was serving the Florentine Republic. The ring bore the image of a rampant Borgia family symbol, but what struck me was not its design, but the absolute authority it represented. When Cesare pressed that ring into wax, cities surrendered, armies mobilized, and enemies disappeared. I realized I was witnessing power in its purest, most undiluted form. Cesare was everything the philosophy books said a leader shouldn't be: ruthless, calculating, and willing to break any rule to achieve his objectives. Yet he was also everything that actually worked in the political arena of our time. While other nobles debated honor and tradition, Cesare studied maps and supply lines. While they relied on ancient bloodlines for legitimacy, he created legitimacy through sheer effectiveness. His methods were brutal, but his results were undeniable. I watched him eliminate the Orsini and Colonna families, not through grand battles, that would have devastated the countryside. But through strategic deception that neutralized threats with minimal collateral damage, he invited his enemies to what they believed was a reconciliation dinner, then arrested them all at once. His critics called it treachery, but I saw surgical precision. Why wage a war that would kill thousands when you could achieve the same result by capturing a dozen key players? What fascinated me most was how Cesare managed his public image. To his enemies, he appeared unpredictable and dangerous. They never knew when his next strike would come or from which direction. To his allies, he seemed reliable and generous, always delivering on his promises of protection and reward. To the common people, he brought stability and order to regions that had suffered under weak or absent leadership. He understood that different audiences require different versions of the truth, but I also witnessed his greatest weakness, which ultimately led to his downfall. Cesare became intoxicated by his own power, believing that force alone could solve every problem. When his father, Pope Alexander VI, died unexpectedly, Cesare discovered that he had built his entire empire on a foundation that could crumble with a single death. He had been so focused on eliminating external threats that he had neglected to create the internal structures necessary for lasting success. His signet ring, which had once commanded absolute obedience, became worthless overnight. The same nobles who had bowed before him now turned their backs, sensing weakness. The same cities that had opened their gates now barred them shut. I learned that power based purely on fear is inherently unstable. It works magnificently until the moment it stops working, and then it collapses completely. Caesar's rise taught me the importance of decisive action and strategic thinking. His fall taught me the equal importance of building systems that outlast individuals. He showed me that you could achieve remarkable things by understanding human nature and organizing your efforts accordingly. But also that sustainable success requires more than brilliant tactics, requires the wisdom to know when to stop, when to consolidate, and when to shift from conquest to governance. The bull on his ring represented power, but I came to understand that true power lies not in the ability to destroy your enemies, but in the ability to transform them into allies, or render them irrelevant through superior positioning. The Medici coat of arms returned to Florence, like a storm cloud that everyone could see approaching, but no one knew how to avoid. When Giovanni de' Medici was elected Pope Leo X, I knew our Republican experiment was living on borrowed time. The family that had once been exiled now commanded not just wealth and influence, but divine authority. I watched colleagues who had spent years denouncing the Medici suddenly discover urgent reasons to praise their wisdom and virtue. My position as second Chancellor of the Republic had given me a front-row seat to the inner workings of power, but it also made me a marked man when the political winds shifted. I had served the Republic faithfully for 14 years, believing that competence and dedication would protect me from political upheaval. I was about to learn how naive this assumption truly was, when Spanish troops restored the Medici to power in 1512. My dismissal came swiftly and without ceremony. The position that had defined my identity, the work that had consumed my passion, the influence I had carefully cultivated, all of it vanished in a single day. Worse than the loss of income or status was the realization that everything I thought I understood about my own security had been an illusion. The conspiracy accusations followed soon after. Former colleagues, desperate to prove their loyalty to the new regime, pointed fingers at anyone associated with the old order. They claimed I had plotted against the Medici, that I had been involved in schemes to restore the Republic through violence. The irony was bitter, who had studied power so carefully, who had observed how political changes create scapegoats, found myself cast in exactly that role. Prison taught me lessons that no book could convey. Stripped of titles, connections, and comforts, I confronted my own mortality in ways that clarified my thinking wonderfully. The torture was meant to extract confessions, but it extracted something else, a deeper understanding of how quickly circumstances can transform the mighty into the powerless. I learned that pain has a way of revealing which beliefs you truly hold and which ones were merely convenient social performances. During those dark months, the Medici coat of arms seemed to mock me from every official building and document. The lions and fleur-de-lis that symbolized their restored authority reminded me daily that I had backed the wrong side, not because my principles were flawed, but because I had failed to read the deeper currents of power that would ultimately determine the outcome. My release came not through justice or vindication, but through a general amnesty that reflected the new regime's confidence in its position. They could afford to be magnanimous because they had won completely. I was freed not as a recognition of my innocence, but as a demonstration of their power to grant mercy. The distinction was humbling but educational. The fall taught me that proximity to power is not the same as possessing power, and that serving a cause faithfully does not guarantee the cause will protect you when protection becomes inconvenient. I learned that in times of political transition, competence can become a liability if it's associated with the losing side. Most importantly, I discovered that personal devastation can become intellectual liberation if you have the courage to learn from it rather than simply endure it. In exile, at my small farm in Sant'Andrea, surrounded by olive groves and the simple rhythms of rural life, I began the work that would define my legacy. The original manuscript of The Prince emerged not from academic theorizing, but from the urgent need to make sense of everything I had witnessed, experienced, and lost. Each page was written with the intensity of a man who had touched real power and felt it slip away. My days fell into a pattern that saved my sanity. I would rise before dawn to tend the farm, losing myself in the honest labor of cutting wood and managing peasants, who cared nothing for political theory but everything for practical results. Their straightforward approach to problems, something worked, they continued it. If it failed, they tried something else, reminded me that effectiveness matters more than elegance. But in the evenings, I transformed myself completely. I would wash away the dust of manual labor, dress in my finest clothes, and enter my study to commune with the great minds of antiquity. I read Cicero and Caesar, Livy and Tacitus, not as a scholar seeking abstract knowledge, but as a practitioner desperate to understand the patterns that govern success and failure in human affairs. The manuscript grew from this strange alchemy of practical experience and classical learning. I was writing not for professors or philosophers, but for anyone who needed to navigate the treacherous waters of competition and ambition. I had seen too many good people fail because they refused to acknowledge how the world actually operates, and too many ruthless people succeed because they understood human nature better than their moral superiors. The revolutionary decision came when I chose to separate effectiveness from conventional morality. This wasn't because I lacked ethical convictions, but because I had observed that moral posturing often serves as a substitute for effective action. The prince who bankrupts his state through excessive generosity may feel virtuous, but his subjects will suffer. The leader who refuses to make hard decisions to preserve an image of kindness often creates greater cruelty through inaction. Writing these truths felt dangerous, even in the privacy of my study, I was articulating principles that everyone understood intuitively, but no one dared state explicitly. The gap between how people claimed to operate and how they actually behaved was enormous. And I was proposing to close that gap through honest analysis rather than comfortable self-deception. Each chapter emerged from specific memories, my observations of Cesare Borgia, my experiences in the Florentine government, my analysis of why certain leaders thrived while others perished. But I was transforming these particular experiences into universal principles that could be applied by anyone seeking to achieve significant goals in a competitive environment. The manuscript became my attempt to create something valuable from the wreckage of my political career. If I could no longer influence events directly, perhaps I could influence how future leaders understood and approached the eternal challenges of power. The irony was not lost on me. My greatest failure had provided the raw material for what might become my most enduring success. I wrote with the urgency of someone who had learned that circumstances can change instantly and completely, that today's certainties can become tomorrow's impossibilities. The prince was my insurance policy against irrelevance, my bid to remain useful even after I had been discarded by the political system. I had served so faithfully. The Venetian trade maps that adorned the walls of successful merchants taught me something profound about competitive advantage. These maps didn't just show geographical features, they revealed trade routes, political alliances, seasonal patterns, and the locations of competitors' strengths and weaknesses. The merchants who prospered were those who understood not just their own capabilities, but the entire landscape in which they operated. Most people fail in their careers because they operate with faulty maps. They assume their workplace functions according to the official organizational chart, that promotions go to the most deserving, that hard work automatically translates into recognition. These assumptions are not just wrong, they're dangerous. They cause you to invest energy in activities that feel important but produce no meaningful results. I learned this lesson painfully during my early years in government. I believed that excellence in my assigned duties would naturally lead to advancement. I produced detailed reports, managed complex negotiations, and solved difficult problems with skill and creativity. Yet, I watched colleagues with inferior work product but superior political instincts receive the opportunities I craved. They had mapped the real power structure while I had been studying the official one. The first step in knowing your arena is identifying who actually makes decisions. The person with the impressive title may not be the person with real influence. In Renaissance Florence, the Gonfalonier held the highest office. But wealthy merchants and banking families often determined policy through private conversations and strategic relationships. In modern organizations, the CEO may have ultimate authority, but middle managers, executive assistants, and informal leaders frequently control the information and access that shape decisions. Understanding the unwritten rules matters more than mastering the written ones. Every organization has a culture that determines how things really get done, who gets listened to, and what behaviors lead to advancement. These rules are rarely explicit, but they govern everything. In the Florentine government, officially we valued merit and virtue, but practically we rewarded loyalty and political awareness. Learning to read these hidden patterns separates successful people from frustrated ones. Pay attention to resource flows: money, information, access, and attention. Success often depends on positioning yourself where these resources naturally concentrate or pass through. The Venetian merchants didn't just sell goods, They positioned themselves at the intersection of trade routes where they could benefit from multiple transactions. In any competitive environment, finding these intersection points can transform your trajectory. Study the incentive structures that actually drive behavior. People respond to what they're rewarded for, not what they're told to value. If an organization claims to prioritize collaboration but only promotes individuals who claim credit for team successes, the smart strategy is obvious. If a company preaches innovation but punishes intelligent failures, you know that risk-taking will be quietly discouraged regardless of official statements. Observe the patterns of success and failure around you. Who gets promoted and why? Who gets marginalized and how? What behaviors lead to increased responsibility, and what actions result in decreased influence? These patterns reveal the true values and priorities of your environment, regardless of what the mission statement claims. The arena you're competing in has rules, but those rules may not be the ones that are publicly acknowledged. Your job is to understand the real game being played, not the game you wish were being played. This isn't cynical, it's practical. Once you understand how your environment actually functions, you can decide whether to work within those parameters, change them, or find a different arena entirely. Lorenzo de' Medici's public mask was a masterpiece of strategic theatre. To the common people of Florence, he appeared as Lorenzo, the magnificent patron of arts and culture, who made their city the envy of Europe. To foreign diplomats, he seemed like a reasonable negotiator committed to peace and prosperity. To potential rivals, he projected strength and unpredictability that discouraged challenges to his authority. Each audience saw the version of Lorenzo that would most effectively serve his interests. Most people approach reputation management backwards. They try to convince others that they possess certain qualities, instead of first deciding what qualities would be most useful to project. They worry about being authentic instead of being strategic. But authenticity without effectiveness is merely self-indulgence, while strategic image management is a form of leadership. You're helping others understand how to relate to you productively. Your reputation precedes you into every room, every conversation, every opportunity. People make decisions about whether to trust you, promote you, include you, or oppose you based largely on the story they tell themselves about who you are and what you represent. You can either manage that story consciously or allow others to write it for you based on incomplete information and casual observations. The key insight is that perception often matters more than reality because perception determines how people behave toward you. If colleagues perceive you as someone whose ideas should be taken seriously, they'll listen more carefully when you speak. If they see you as politically naive, they'll discount your strategic input even when it's brilliant. If they view you as unreliable, they'll exclude you from important projects regardless of your actual track record. I learned this lesson through observing the contrasts between successful and unsuccessful members of the Florentine government. The unsuccessful ones focused exclusively on doing good work, assuming their competence would speak for itself. The successful ones understood that competence without visibility is worthless, while visible competence creates a multiplier effect that amplifies every achievement. Managing your image requires understanding what qualities your environment rewards, and then consistently demonstrating those qualities in ways that feel natural rather than calculated. If your organization values innovation, you need to be known for creative thinking. If it prioritizes reliability, you must become associated with consistent delivery. If it respects analytical rigor, your reputation should center on thorough, data-driven insights. The art lies in appearing both competent and non-threatening simultaneously. You want to be seen as capable enough to handle important responsibilities, but not so ambitious that you trigger defensive reactions from those currently in power. This delicate balance requires careful calibration, demonstrating your abilities while expressing appropriate deference to hierarchy and established relationships. Control the narrative by being the first to frame your own achievements and setbacks. When you complete a successful project, make sure the right people understand not just what you accomplished, but how you accomplished it and what it reveals about your capabilities. When you encounter failures or obstacles, acknowledge them quickly while emphasizing what you learned and how you'll apply those lessons moving forward. Remember that consistency builds credibility over time. People need to see the same version of you repeatedly before they'll trust that version is real. This means your strategic image must be able to maintain it under pressure and across different contexts without exhausting yourself or compromising your core values. Your image is not a facade you construct to fool others. A tool you develop to help others understand your value and potential contribution to their success. The Treaty of Cambrai demonstrated something I had observed throughout my political career: individual brilliance rarely defeats organized mediocrity. The most gifted leaders, when isolated, often fall to inferior opponents who understand the power of strategic partnerships. In that treaty, multiple powers combined their limited strengths to defeat Venice, which had become too successful for its own good. The lesson was clear: no one succeeds alone for long. During my time in government, I watched talented individuals consistently underperform because they believed their merit should be sufficient. They worked harder, produced better results, and demonstrated superior judgment, yet they remained frustrated while less capable colleagues advanced past them. The difference was always the same: the successful ones had cultivated relationships that amplified their individual efforts. Strategic alliances differ fundamentally from casual friendships or networking relationships. Friendships are based on personal affinity and shared interests. Networking focuses on collecting contacts who might someday prove useful. Strategic alliances, however, are built around mutual benefit and complementary strengths. They're partnerships where each person's success contributes to the other's advancement. The first step in building strategic alliances is conducting an honest inventory of your own capabilities and limitations. What do you do exceptionally well? What resources do you control? What access do you possess? What knowledge gives you advantages? Understanding your own value proposition allows you to identify people who could benefit from partnership with you, rather than simply hoping they'll be generous with their assistance. Look for potential allies whose strengths complement your weaknesses and whose weaknesses match your strengths. If you excel at detailed analysis but struggle with public presentation, seek partnerships with people who thrive in public settings but prefer others to handle research and preparation. If you understand technical aspects of your industry but lack political awareness, align yourself with those who read organizational dynamics intuitively. The art of alliance building lies in making your success inseparable from your ally's success. This requires structuring relationships so that advancing your interests naturally advances theirs as well. When you receive opportunities, you look for ways to include your allies. When they achieve recognition, they remember who contributed to their success. This reciprocal dynamic creates bonds stronger than mere goodwill. I learned from watching the Italian city-states that successful alliances require careful maintenance. Partners must consistently demonstrate their value to each other while remaining sensitive to changing circumstances that might alter the balance of the relationship. What begins as an equal partnership might evolve into a mentor-student relationship, or vice versa, and both parties must adapt gracefully to these natural progressions. Timing matters enormously in alliance formation. Approaching someone when they're riding high and feeling secure often produces polite rejections. Approaching them when they're facing challenges and could genuinely benefit from support often creates lasting bonds. People remember who stood with them during difficult periods more vividly than those who celebrated with them. During good times, be prepared to invest in relationships before you need them. The most valuable alliances are forged during periods when neither party faces immediate crises. This allows you to build trust and understanding gradually, so that when opportunities or challenges arise, you already have the foundation for effective collaboration. Remember that strategic alliances require ongoing attention and occasional sacrifice. You must sometimes prioritize your allies' immediate interests over your own short-term gains to preserve relationships that will benefit you over the long term. This isn't altruism, it's intelligent self-interest extended across time. The goal is not to manipulate others into serving your agenda, but to create situations where serving your agenda also serves theirs. When you can align interests authentically, you transform potential competitors into committed partners, the dice of fortune that Renaissance nobles used in their games taught me something profound about advancement in life. Successful players didn't avoid risk, they calculated it. They studied the odds, assessed their resources, and made strategic wagers that maximized their potential gains while minimizing their potential losses. The nobles who prospered were those who understood that refusing to play guaranteed they would never win. Most people misunderstand the relationship between safety and success. They believe that avoiding risk protects them, but in competitive environments, avoiding risk often represents the greatest risk of all. While you're playing it safe, others are taking calculated chances that position them for advancement. Your cautiousness doesn't protect your current position, it ensures you'll be passed by those willing to act decisively when opportunities arise. During my government service, I observed two types of officials: those who sought to avoid any possibility of failure, and those who sought to maximize their probability of success. The first group focused on protecting themselves from criticism by never proposing anything controversial or challenging. The second group focused on producing results that would enhance their reputations and create new opportunities. The outcomes were predictable. The risk-averse remained in minor positions, while the strategically bold advanced to positions of influence. Calculated risk-taking begins with understanding the difference between intelligent speculation and reckless gambling. Gambling involves wagering resources on outcomes you cannot influence or predict. Calculated risk-taking involves making strategic investments where your judgment, effort, and skills can influence the outcome in your favor. The Renaissance merchant who invested in a trading voyage understood the routes, the political climate, and the market conditions. He wasn't gambling, he was applying expertise to create favorable odds. The key is learning to evaluate opportunities, like a Renaissance prince planning a military campaign. What are the potential gains if you succeed? What are the likely costs if you fail? What factors can you control or influence? What information do you have that others might lack? How does this opportunity fit into your larger strategic objectives? This analytical approach transforms risk from emotional decision-making into rational calculation. Timing often determines whether a risk proves wise or foolish. The same action that leads to failure when taken too early might produce breakthrough, success when taken at the right moment. I learned to watch for convergent situations where multiple factors align to create unusual opportunities. When market conditions, organizational changes, and personal circumstances converge favorably, the risk of action often becomes lower than the risk of inaction. Successful risk-taking also requires having multiple options available simultaneously. Don't stake everything on a single opportunity, no matter how promising it appears. Develop several possibilities so that if one fails to materialize, others might still produce the advancement you seek. This diversification allows you to be more aggressive with individual opportunities because you're not dependent on any single outcome. Most importantly, learn to act decisively when others are paralyzed by uncertainty. Crisis and change create the conditions where bold action can produce disproportionate rewards, while others are waiting for more information or seeking consensus. You can sometimes gain decisive advantages by moving quickly based on the information already available. The goal is not to become reckless, but to become comfortable with intelligent uncertainty. Perfect information is rarely available, and waiting for certainty often means missing opportunities entirely. The skill lies in learning to act confidently based on incomplete but sufficient information, while remaining flexible enough to adjust your approach as circumstances evolve. Remember that your reputation for good judgment increases your access to better opportunities. Each successful, calculated risk enhances your credibility and makes others more likely to include you in future ventures. This creates a positive cycle where wise risk-taking leads to better positions, which provide access to higher quality opportunities. For further advancement, the executioner's axe in Renaissance justice served one purpose: swift, decisive elimination of what threatened the state's survival. Watching public executions in Florence taught me that effective leadership often requires the courage to cut away elements that seem valuable but actually drain resources and attention from more critical objectives. The axe fell not from cruelty, but from clarity about what mattered most. The fundamental challenge facing anyone seeking significant success is that everything seems important when viewed in isolation. Your boss's pet project demands attention. Your colleague's request for assistance appears reasonable. The training opportunity looks valuable. The committee assignment offers visibility. Each individual demand on your time and energy can be justified, but collectively they create a scattered approach that prevents excellence in any area. I learned this lesson through observing the contrast between effective and ineffective leaders. In government, the ineffective ones tried to please everyone and address every concern. They attended every meeting, responded to every request, and attempted to maintain perfect relationships with all stakeholders. The result was exhaustion, mediocrity, and ultimate irrelevance, as their attention became so divided that they could make no meaningful impact anywhere. The effective leaders identified their core objectives and defended them ruthlessly against all competing demands. They said no to good opportunities to preserve capacity for great ones. They disappointed some people to avoid disappointing the people who mattered most to their success. They understood that trying to do everything guarantees you'll do nothing exceptionally well. Ruthless. Prioritization begins with honest assessment of what activities actually advance your most important goals versus what activities merely feel productive. Many people confuse motion with progress, filling their time with tasks that create the sensation of accomplishment without producing meaningful results. reading every industry publication feels educational. But if it doesn't improve your decision-making or create new opportunities, it's sophisticated procrastination. The practice requires developing what I call strategic indifference, the ability to remain unmoved by urgent requests that don't align with your core objectives. This doesn't mean becoming callous or unhelpful, but rather becoming selective about where you invest your limited resources of time, attention, and energy. Every yes to one thing is automatically a no to something else, so each commitment must be evaluated against alternatives. Learn to distinguish between what's important to you and what other people think should be important to you. Family members, colleagues, and society in general will have opinions about how you should spend your time and what you should prioritize. Their advice might be well-intentioned, but their priorities reflect their values and circumstances, not yours. The courage to disappoint others, when necessary, is essential for achieving anything significant. Develop systems for quickly evaluating new opportunities and requests. I recommend asking 3 questions. Does this advance my most important current objective? Does this develop a capability I need for future objectives? Does this strengthen a relationship that's crucial to my success? If the answer to all 3 questions is no, the answer to the opportunity should also be no, regardless of how appealing it might seem. Remember that priorities must evolve as circumstances change. What matters most during one phase of your career might become irrelevant during the next phase. Regularly reassess your commitments to ensure they still serve your current objectives, rather than objectives that are no longer relevant. The discipline to abandon previous priorities when they're no longer useful is as important as the discipline to maintain them when they still matter. The goal is not to become selfish or antisocial, but to become effective. When you focus your efforts on areas where you can create the most value, you ultimately serve others better than when you scatter your attention across numerous, less important activities. Excellence in focused areas creates more opportunities to help others than mediocrity in multiple areas. The chameleon's ability to change its appearance while maintaining its essential nature fascinated Renaissance naturalists, and it should fascinate anyone seeking to navigate complex organizational environments. The chameleon doesn't lose its identity when it adapts. It reveals different aspects of its authentic self, depending on what the environment requires for survival and success. This is the essence of adaptive leadership. Most people approach workplace relationships with a one-size-fits-all strategy. They interact with their boss the same way they interact with their peers, present ideas to analytical personalities the same way they present to emotional ones, and use identical approaches for managing up and managing down. This inflexibility severely limits their effectiveness and creates unnecessary friction in professional relationships. During my diplomatic missions, I learned that successful negotiation required rapidly reading each new counterpart and adapting my approach accordingly. With the French, who valued intellectual sophistication, I emphasized the logical framework of our proposals. With the Germans, who prioritized practical outcomes, I focused on concrete benefits and implementation details. With fellow Italians, who understood political nuance, I could discuss the subtle implications and unofficial arrangements that made deals possible. The key insight is that effective communication requires speaking in the language your audience understands, not the language you prefer. This doesn't mean being dishonest or manipulative, means being thoughtful about how to present your authentic thoughts and ideas in ways that resonate with different personality. types, and situational contexts. Adaptive leadership begins with developing acute observational skills. Pay attention to how different people make decisions, what types of arguments they find compelling, what communication styles they respond to positively, and what approaches trigger defensive reactions. Some people need extensive data before making choices. Others prefer quick summaries and trust their intuition. Some want to explore possibilities. Others want clear recommendations. Learn to recognize the unspoken rules that govern different relationships and contexts. The way you approach your direct supervisor should differ from how you interact with senior executives during brief encounters. The tone appropriate for team meetings might be wrong for one-on-one conversations. The level of detail suitable for written reports could be excessive for verbal updates. Adapting these elements while maintaining consistent core messages demonstrates social intelligence. The art lies in remaining authentic while adjusting your presentation style. Your fundamental values, objectives, and personality shouldn't change based on your audience. But your communication approach should be tailored to maximize understanding and acceptance. Think of this as translation rather than transformation. You're expressing the same truths in different languages. Practice reading situations quickly to determine what approach will be most effective. Is this a formal setting that requires structured presentation, or an informal context where casual conversation would be more appropriate? Are you dealing with someone who needs time to process information, or someone who makes rapid decisions? Is this a relationship-building interaction or a task-focused transaction? Develop multiple ways to express the same core ideas so you can adjust your approach based on real-time feedback. If your analytical approach isn't resonating, shift to concrete examples. If logical arguments seem to be falling flat, try connecting to emotional benefits. If detailed explanations are losing attention, summarize key points more succinctly. Remember that adaptation should be strategic rather than reactive. Don't simply mirror whatever style others display. Consider what approach will best serve your objectives while respecting their preferences and the demands of the situation. Sometimes the most effective strategy is deliberately contrasting with others. Approaches to provide balance or alternative perspectives. The goal is to become fluent in multiple styles of interaction, so you can choose the most effective approach for each situation rather than being limited to a single way of operating. This flexibility multiplies your influence and creates opportunities to connect with a broader range of people. The Venetian spy. Networks, cipher systems, taught me that information is the ultimate currency in any competitive environment. Venice built its commercial empire not just through superior products or lower prices, but through better intelligence about market conditions, political developments, and competitors' intentions. Their merchants knew what their rivals were planning before the rivals had fully decided themselves. This informational advantage translated directly into strategic and financial superiority. In every organization I've observed, the people who advance most rapidly are those who understand what's really happening beneath the surface of official communications. They know which projects have genuine support versus which ones exist only on paper. They understand which relationships are strengthening or deteriorating. They recognize opportunities and threats, while others are still operating based on outdated assumptions. Information warfare in professional settings isn't about espionage or unethical behavior. It's about developing superior awareness of the environment in which you're competing. Most people operate with remarkably limited understanding of the forces shaping their workplace. They know their immediate responsibilities and perhaps some general company news. But they miss the subtle signals that reveal where real opportunities lie. The foundation of information advantage is strategic listening. Most people listen primarily to respond rather than to understand. They're planning their next comment while others are speaking, which causes them to miss crucial insights about motivations, concerns, and unstated priorities. Developing the discipline to listen with genuine curiosity rather than defensive reactivity reveals patterns that others miss entirely. Learn to identify and cultivate relationships with people who possess different types of valuable information. Every organization has individuals who, by virtue of their position or personality, become informal information hubs. Administrative assistants often know more about executive priorities than the executive's direct reports. Long-tenured employees understand historical context that explains current decisions. People in cross-functional roles see connections that specialists miss. Pay attention to what people don't say as much as what they do say. In Renaissance diplomacy, I learned that omissions often revealed more than statements. When someone consistently avoids mentioning a particular topic, project, or person, that absence of information itself becomes significant data. When enthusiasm seems forced or explanations become overly detailed, underlying concerns usually exist. Develop systems for organizing and analyzing the information you gather. Random pieces of data become useful intelligence only when you can recognize patterns and connections. I kept detailed notes, not just about official decisions and announcements, but about informal comments, changes in behavior, and shifts in relationships. Over time, these observations revealed trends that helped me anticipate developments others found surprising. Master the art of asking questions that elicit useful information without appearing intrusive. People generally enjoy talking about their work, challenges, and successes when they feel the listener is genuinely interested rather than fishing for gossip. Questions about process often reveal more than questions about outcomes. How did you approach that challenge? Tends to produce more valuable insights than what was the result. Share information strategically to build reciprocal relationships. Information flows toward people who demonstrate they can be trusted with sensitive knowledge and who provide value in return. This doesn't mean gossiping or betraying confidences, but rather sharing appropriate insights that help others make better decisions or avoid problems. Remember that timing often determines the value of information. Intelligence that arrives too late to influence decisions has minimal worth, while information that provides advance warning of opportunities or threats can be extraordinarily valuable. Develop networks that give you early access to developments rather than learning about them through official channels after decisions have already been made. Protect your own sensitive information as carefully as you gather intelligence about others. Be conscious of what you reveal about your plans, concerns, and relationships. Information asymmetry, knowing more than others know about your situation while understanding their situation, clearly provides strategic advantages that can be decisive in competitive environments. The gladiator's trident was designed for strategic combat. Its three prongs could hold an opponent at distance while still delivering decisive strikes when opportunities arose. Unlike a sword, which required close engagement, or a spear, which had limited versatility, the trident represented controlled aggression. This is the perfect metaphor for how successful people must approach inevitable workplace conflicts. Most people approach conflict with one of two equally ineffective strategies. They either avoid it entirely allowing others to walk over them and their ideas, or they engage in every battle with maximum intensity, creating unnecessary enemies and exhausting themselves on minor issues. Both approaches guarantee mediocrity. Avoidance leads to irrelevance. Constant combat leads to isolation. The third way controlled conflict requires the wisdom to choose your battles carefully and the skill to engage productively when confrontation becomes necessary. This means standing firm on issues that matter to your core objectives while remaining flexible on peripheral concerns. It means being willing to create temporary discomfort to achieve lasting respect. During my time observing Renaissance politics, I noticed that the most effective leaders were neither peacekeepers nor warmongers. They were strategic fighters who understood when conflict served their purposes and when it didn't. They could be ruthlessly decisive when essential interests were at stake. But they could also compromise gracefully when the stakes were low. This selective approach made their occasional confrontations more impactful. Learn to distinguish between productive conflict and destructive conflict. Productive conflict focuses on issues, ideas, and outcomes rather than personalities and egos. It seeks to resolve genuine disagreements about direction or approach. Destructive conflict becomes personal, emotional, and ego-driven, creating lasting damage to relationships without producing better solutions. The key to controlled conflict is establishing clear boundaries about what you will and won't accept, while remaining calm and professional in your communication. When someone attempts to take credit for your work, undermine your authority, or ignore your legitimate concerns, you must respond firmly but thoughtfully. Silence in these situations often gets interpreted as acceptance or weakness. Timing your confrontations strategically multiplies their effectiveness. Addressing problems immediately prevents them from escalating, but addressing them in the right setting with the right people present can transform conflicts into opportunities for clarification and improvement. Private conversations often resolve issues more effectively than public confrontations, but sometimes public clarity about boundaries becomes necessary. Master the art of disagreeing without being disagreeable. You can challenge ideas, question assumptions, and propose alternatives while maintaining respect for the people involved. This approach allows you to engage in substantive conflict without triggering defensive reactions that prevent productive resolution. Focus on understanding others' underlying concerns while clearly articulating your own. Use conflicts as opportunities to demonstrate your problem-solving abilities and emotional intelligence. When disagreements arise, you can distinguish yourself by proposing constructive solutions rather than simply highlighting problems. Others often watch how you handle conflicts as indicators of how you might perform under pressure in high positions. Remember that avoiding conflict entirely sends the wrong message about your commitment to excellence and your willingness to defend important principles. People need to know that working with you requires treating you and your contributions with appropriate respect. This doesn't mean being combative, but it does mean being willing to engage when engagement becomes necessary. The goal is to develop a reputation as someone who is reasonable and collaborative most of the time, but who will stand firm when circumstances require it. This combination makes people more likely to respect your positions and less likely to test your boundaries unnecessarily. They understand that while you prefer cooperation, you're prepared for conflict when cooperation isn't possible. Controlled conflict isn't about winning every argument. It's about ensuring that your legitimate interests receive appropriate consideration in every important decision that affects your success. The eternal flame that burned in Florence's Palazzo Vecchio represented something I came to understand. Only after decades of studying human nature, true influence outlasts the individuals who create it. The flame survived political upheavals, regime changes, and the deaths of countless leaders who thought their personal power would endure forever. My years of exile taught me to distinguish between temporary authority and lasting impact. Looking back on my career from the perspective of age and experience, I realized that my greatest insights came not from my successes, but from my failures and observations of others' mistakes. The fall of the Republic, my imprisonment, and my subsequent marginalization stripped away illusions about the nature of power that had clouded my understanding when I held official positions. Power, I learned, is not a possession that you can accumulate and store. It's a relationship that must be continuously maintained and renewed. The moment you stop serving others' interests in ways they value, your influence begins to diminish. This is why so many capable people achieve positions of authority only to find themselves increasingly isolated as they focus on maintaining their status rather than continuing to create value. The leaders I observed who built lasting influence understood that their role was to develop systems and relationships that functioned effectively even in their absence. They created processes that solved recurring problems, identified and trained capable successors, and established networks of mutual support that continued generating benefits long after they moved on to other roles. Their legacy lay not in what they controlled, but in what they enabled others to accomplish. My exile forced me to confront a humbling truth: individual brilliance without institutional support is fragile and temporary. The most sophisticated strategies and carefully cultivated relationships can disappear overnight when political winds shift or economic circumstances change. The only reliable form of security comes from developing capabilities and insights that remain valuable regardless of your official position or current circumstances. This realization led me to focus on understanding and articulating principles rather than accumulating power for its own sake. The prince became more influential than any government position I ever held because it addressed universal challenges that persist across time and cultures. Ideas, properly developed and expressed, can outlive their creators and continue influencing behavior long after personal authority has vanished. The difference between temporary victories and enduring influence lies in your approach to developing others. When you hoard knowledge, connections, and opportunities to maintain your own advantage, you create a ceiling on your impact. When you share insights that help others succeed, you multiply your influence through their achievements. The most powerful people I knew understood this multiplication effect and used it consciously. True leadership involves accepting responsibility for outcomes while sharing credit for successes. This approach builds loyalty and trust that extends far beyond formal reporting relationships. People remember who helped them advance their careers, and they often repay that assistance with continued support even when circumstances change and official hierarchies shift. My studies of classical leaders revealed that those remembered most favorably by history were not necessarily the most successful during their lifetimes, but rather those who left their successors better equipped to handle future challenges. They understood that their ultimate legacy would be measured by what continued to function and flourish after they were gone. The eternal flame in Florence reminded me daily that institutions, ideas, and influence systems can outlast any individual leader. The goal should not be to make yourself indispensable, but to make your contribution to others' success so valuable that they carry forward the principles and approaches that served everyone effectively. This is how temporary authority transforms into lasting legacy. The digital crown of influence in today's interconnected world operates by the same fundamental principles that governed Renaissance politics. But the speed and scale of modern communication have amplified both opportunities and risks. Where I once observed power dynamics within the confined space of Italian city-states, today's leaders must navigate global networks where reputation can be built or destroyed with unprecedented velocity. The principles I discovered 5 centuries ago remained remarkably relevant because human nature itself hasn't changed. People are still driven by the same core motivations: fear, desire, pride, and the need for security and recognition. They still respond to the same fundamental approaches to influence and persuasion. They still make decisions based on emotion and then rationalize those decisions with logic. Technology has changed how these patterns manifest, but not the patterns themselves. In modern organizations, the concept of knowing your arena now includes understanding digital ecosystems and virtual power structures. The colleague who rarely speaks in meetings might wield enormous influence through their network connections or their ability to shape opinions through internal communication channels. The real decision makers might be scattered across different time zones, collaborating through platforms I could never have imagined. Strategic alliances have become both easier to form and more complex to maintain in our hyper-connected world. You can build relationships with influential people globally, but you're also competing for attention with thousands of other professionals seeking the same connections. The principles of mutual benefit and complementary strengths remain crucial, but the execution requires navigating digital communication. Nuances that didn't exist in my era. Image management has become simultaneously more important and more challenging. Your reputation now extends far beyond your immediate workplace to include your online presence, social media activity, and digital footprint. A single ill-considered comment can reach millions of people instantly, while a strategic insight shared thoughtfully can establish your expertise across entire industries. The speed of modern communication demands the same careful consideration I advocated, but with much less time for deliberation. The information warfare principles I developed have become exponentially more relevant as data has become the primary currency of competitive advantage. Companies rise and fall based on their ability to gather, analyze, and act on information faster than their competitors. Individual careers increasingly depend on your capacity to identify patterns and trends before they become obvious to everyone else. Controlled conflict has evolved to include managing disagreements across multiple communication channels simultaneously. You might need to address the same issue through email, video calls, instant messaging, and face-to-face conversations. Maintaining consistency while adapting your approach to each medium's unique characteristics. The acceleration of change means that the adaptive leadership I advocated has become even more critical. Industries transform within years rather than decades. Skills become obsolete rapidly while new capabilities emerge constantly. The ability to reinvent yourself while maintaining your core value proposition has shifted from being advantageous to being essential for survival. Modern professionals face complexity that would have amazed Renaissance leaders, but they also have access to tools and resources that would have seemed magical to my generation. The fundamentals of human psychology and organizational behavior remain constant, providing a stable foundation for navigating an increasingly dynamic environment. The challenge is applying timeless principles to unprecedented circumstances while maintaining the ethical standards that ensure long-term success rather than short-term advantage. The crossroads stone that marked the intersection of major routes outside Florence forced every traveler to make a conscious decision about their destination. You could no longer simply follow the path you had been walking. You had to choose which direction would lead you toward your intended goal. Today, you face a similar crossroads in your professional life, and the choice you make will determine whether you continue struggling with the same frustrations or finally break through to the success you deserve. Most people reach this decision point multiple times throughout their careers, but they consistently choose the familiar path rather than the challenging one. They continue working harder instead of working strategically. They keep hoping that their efforts will eventually be recognized rather than taking responsibility for ensuring their value becomes visible. They maintain comfortable illusions about how their workplace operates rather than developing accurate understanding of the real power dynamics. This preference for familiar failure over uncertain success is understandable but destructive. The known path feels safer because you understand its patterns, even when those patterns consistently lead to disappointment. The alternative path requires you to acknowledge that your current approach isn't working and to develop new capabilities that feel uncomfortable initially. It demands that you operate with a level of strategic awareness that many of your colleagues lack. The personal cost of embracing these principles involves abandoning several comforting beliefs that may have shaped your professional identity. You must accept that merit alone doesn't guarantee advancement, that good intentions don't excuse poor results, and that your success depends more on your ability to navigate human nature than on your technical competence. These realizations can feel disillusioning initially, but they're actually liberating, because they shift control back to you. You'll need to develop comfort with strategic thinking that considers political realities alongside practical concerns. This doesn't mean becoming manipulative or dishonest, but it does mean becoming sophisticated about how decisions really get made and how you can position yourself to influence those decisions effectively. You'll need to invest time and energy in relationship-building activities that might not feel immediately productive. The greater cost of remaining where you are becomes clearer when you project your current trajectory forward. If you continue approaching your career with the same assumptions and strategies that have produced your current results, what will your situation look like in 5 or 10 years? Will you have achieved the influence, recognition, and satisfaction you seek? Or will you still be frustrated by the gap between your efforts and your results? Consider the compound effect of small strategic improvements over time. Each principle you implement won't transform your situation overnight, but the cumulative impact of applying multiple principles consistently will create momentum that accelerates your progress. The colleague who learns to read organizational dynamics more accurately makes better decisions. Better decisions lead to better outcomes. Better outcomes create more opportunities. More opportunities lead to greater influence and advancement. The choice ultimately comes down to whether you're willing to take responsibility for your own advancement, rather than hoping that someone else will recognize your potential and create opportunities for you. The principles I've shared transfer control from external factors. You can't influence to internal capabilities you can develop. They replace hope with strategy and luck with systematic preparation. The transformation that awaits those who make this choice involves not just external advancement, but internal confidence that comes from understanding how success actually works. When you can read situations accurately, build relationships strategically, and navigate conflicts effectively, you operate with a level of professional competence that creates its own opportunities and attracts others who recognize quality when they see it. The Renaissance compass that guided explorers toward undiscovered territories required courage to leave familiar shores and venture into unknown waters. Like those ancient navigators, you now possess the instruments necessary to chart a course toward the professional success you've been seeking. But you must have the courage to begin the journey and the discipline to maintain your direction when obstacles arise. My final counsel is this: start immediately with the principle that addresses your most pressing current challenge. If you're struggling with visibility and recognition, focus first on image management and strategic relationship building. If you're overwhelmed by competing demands, begin with ruthless prioritization. If you're avoiding necessary confrontations, develop your skills in controlled conflict. Progress in one area will create momentum that makes progress in other areas easier. The first steps you must take require no additional resources or permissions. They demand only your commitment to see your situation clearly and act on that understanding. Begin by conducting an honest assessment of your current position using the framework I've provided. Map the real power structure in your organization. Identify the unwritten rules that govern success. Evaluate your reputation and relationships. Objectively, rather than optimistically, this analysis will probably reveal uncomfortable truths about gaps between your perception and reality. But this discomfort is valuable. It signals that you're beginning to see past the convenient fictions that have limited your effectiveness. Most people avoid this kind of honest assessment because they prefer reassuring illusions to challenging truths. But you cannot fix problems you refuse to acknowledge. Once you understand your current position accurately, develop a specific strategy for improvement, rather than hoping that general effort will somehow produce different results. Choose which relationships to prioritize, which opportunities to pursue, which battles to fight, and which activities to eliminate. Strategic focus amplifies your impact far more than increased activity levels. Why delay is the enemy of transformation should be obvious by now. Every day you postpone implementing these principles is another day your competitors use to advance past you. The gap between your current position and your potential position widens with each month you spend operating according to ineffective assumptions. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. The legacy you can create by embracing these truths extends far beyond your individual advancement. When you succeed through strategic excellence rather than political manipulation, you demonstrate that it's possible to achieve significant goals while maintaining your integrity. You become a model for others who want to advance without compromising their values. You prove that understanding how power works can serve ethical purposes. Your invitation to join the ranks of those who truly succeed isn't extended lightly. It requires abandoning comfortable mediocrity for challenging excellence. It demands that you think strategically about every important decision and relationship. It insists that you take responsibility for your results rather than blaming circumstances or other people for your limitations. But the rewards professional advancement, personal satisfaction, and the confidence that comes from understanding how to navigate complex human systems effectively justify every effort required. The principles I've shared have guided successful people for centuries because they're based on unchanging aspects of human nature, rather than temporary circumstances or cultural trends. The Renaissance compass pointed toward magnetic north regardless of weather conditions or the navigator's emotional state. Similarly, these principles will guide you toward your objectives, regardless of the specific challenges you encounter, or the resistance you face from those who prefer the predictability of current arrangements. Your transformed future awaits your decision to begin the journey.